It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, we are back.
Back.
Rita, are we going to get down to the truth of what's going on in America?
Let's hope. And who better to get to it than our next guest, Miranda. Miranda, before we get to the truth, I want to play again what happened at the New York Stock Exchange.
No, we heard it three times already.
I want to play it a fourth time. All right, this is the Stock Exchange. This is President Trump this morning. Listen to this.
John, great job you've done at ABC. I'm really proud of you, and you've been so nice to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't actually acknowledge you at all. But you have been. That really is. It's a terrific job you've done.
Isn't that awesome, Miranda? This morning.
That is just such a fantastic shout out to WABC, and also typically Trump. It's hilarious.
It is. Yeah. It is. Oh my God, it was great. Miranda, we're talking also, of course, about everything on a serious note with Daniel Penny and this Luigi Mangione. You wrote a column. You know what's so scary? That there are these people out there that are shockingly glorifying this guy who took out the CEO of United Healthcare, and yet there's a lot of people vilifying Daniel Penny, who's a hero. What's wrong with people?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it really is a bad omen for the sort of moral compass of, a significant proportion of people. Obviously, they're not the majority, but they just seem to have lost sight of right and wrong. To be excoriating Daniel Penny, who was a good Samaritan, who we wish there were many of them on the subway, which has become such a menace. And unfortunately, there are people who would probably the same sort of people who wanted to defund the police and then turn around when they get robbed and say, where were the cops? They're the same people. They just live in some sort of a fantasy bubble. This Mangione, Luigi Mangione, the gunman, if it's him, he's alleged to be the gunman who shot a man, a father of two, in cold blood, premeditated, in the back. I mean, that is not a hero. That is a coward and a psychopath.
What do you think? What are you learning? Because you found some details also about his travels and his background. Like this Luigi Mangione came from a well-to-do family and then went off the grid, but he was overseas as well, right?
Yeah, it's interesting how his life and Daniel Penny's life tracked almost identically through, right up until this year pretty much, and now they're both, in the clutches of Alvin Bragg. Two deaths, two killings in New York, very different men, but they're both born the same year, 1998. 3 years before 9/11. They grew up within a couple of 100 miles of each other. They were both very sporty. They both were very diligent, good-looking young men, curly hair. And they both, in their mid-20s, had a sort of a bit of a crisis where they didn't know where they were going. And they both traveled overseas. Penny went to South America, Central America, and Luigi Mangione went to Asia, particularly Japan. He was very interested. And then you know that through some of their writings, and Daniel Penny's given some interviews. And, he also wrote, Daniel Penny himself, in a sort of a job-seeking website, that he was searching for meaning and that he found his calling, which was, after he'd been in the Marines and he traveled for a while, it was to help people. And that's exactly what he ended up doing. Whereas Mangione, in his writings about his travels, he's just criticizing the Japanese. He's saying, as if almost he's a scientist inspecting them from afar, a bunch of ants, and just critiquing their life as if they're not human. As if he has no empathy. Whereas Daniel Penny was all empathy. He said that he looked around the subway car and saw the frightened faces of the women and children around him, and he knew he had to do something. He was scared. of course, but he said he was taught in the Marines that courage is not the absence of fear, it's your ability to overcome your own fear. So, they're both so similar. They both went to find themselves in travel, but obviously one of them got a good message and one of them got a bad message.
Yeah, Daniel Penny, too. I mean, what a hero. And he came out the other day and he was saying that he couldn't live with himself if he didn't act at that moment. You know what's interesting? We also have George Venizelos with us in the studio here, longtime FBI, the assistant director for years in New York. And one thing I don't understand about the Luigi Mangione, where were his family? Everybody was looking at the picture of this guy when his mask was down at the hostel. There are pictures of him everywhere. And yet it seems like no family members or friends said, hey, that's my nephew or that's my former roommate. How is that conceivable, George?
Well, do we know that anybody, did the police, it seemed like they may have known who it was before he was caught.
But then NYPD said they didn't have a name until they got him at the McDonald's.
If you're a family member, you're going to recognize it right away. Also, he was off the grid. He was the problem. The mother was concerned about him. So right away, it should have clicked him right away. And they should have called right away. If they didn't, shame on them.
Yeah, and so far it seems like they haven't.
Because he could have went on a rampage and killed somebody else.
Yeah, and he still had a gun with him when he was caught.
So you can't just let that go. You have to inform, that's my son, and he's had issues lately.
Yeah, Miranda, have you heard? I haven't heard any family members or anybody singled him out or called, a tip line. I mean, he was all over the country, that picture. So a customer at McDonald's spotted him out,
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, shame on the family if they didn't actually do anything, because there's no way you could have missed that story. It was the biggest story in the country, one of the biggest stories in the world for a week. And his photograph, many photographs of him, which were quite identifiable, were everywhere in the media. So you would have to be living in a cave not to have noticed that. And if you knew him, if you were his relative, that would have hit you like a dagger to the heart. You would have gone, oh no, that's where he is.
Yeah, Governor Patterson, real quick, your thoughts.
Well, I teach a class, and there are a lot of adults in the class. Only half of them knew about this case when we talked about it this afternoon.
Wow. Oh. Do they live under a rock?
Yes.
Really?
Wow.
No, that really happened, Miranda.
Wow. That's amazing.
I was shocked.
Wow.
I had to go back and explain the whole case to them.
Oh, my goodness. That's amazing.
They didn't know about the shooting of Brian Thompson.
They knew there was some kind of shooting, but they didn't know what it was about, and they didn't read anything about it. And then, once they heard about it, their points of view were interesting.
Well, you know
not
what?
Before then.
They need to be reading the New York Post and also listening to WABC Radio.
It's going to be a requirement in my class from now on.
Thank you, Miranda.